name is Sophia Park.
And I'm Christa Lee.
And this is the most festive podcast of the year. Truly, the snow is out there, and we had a 3-car pileup outside of our doorstep on Christmas Eve. It was something.
That sounds terrible. That hill is awful, so I'm surprised it doesn't happen always.
It was a car hit a tree, and then a truck came to get that car, but it couldn't get the car because the car hit the car. But then it couldn't get that car because another car hit that car.
Okay.
And I don't think anyone was hurt, but people were just sort of like idling in hockey jerseys, staring at it while sipping on coffee until like midnight.
That sounds like a good way to spend your day.
No, it was like Christmas Eve. It was like 9 o'clock on Christmas Eve, and it was like they were all standing on the sidewalk outside of our house. And I felt like they were going to ask me for like, hey, can we like use your fireplace or something? And it was going to be like this festive Christmas miracle where I got together with a bunch of Canadian strangers.
Sure. Turn on the Yule log and sip nog.
Yeah.
While talking about the cars and their torque.
Well, you think about that when you're in the country in Canada. It's like, oh, you see the crash out there. Yeah, it was really bad. Like, they just say that to each other for like 10 hours, I guess.
So you live in Fargo. Film, not real Fargo, the film Fargo.
It can be like that
Fictional
in the country.
Fargo.
Well, before we start, I wanted to go on a tangent, and I did.
Cool.
And as always, this show is funded by our group of patrons, and every show we shout out one of our higher tier patrons for $5 an episode. And if you'd like to support the show and join our community on Discord, you can find us at patreon.com/metagame.fun. The metagame.fun part is written out like words. Okay. So, it's Game of the Year season. Christa, do you care about Game of the Year?
No and yes. It's old hat to basically, no, man, that sucks. I hate that. I don't care about that. But I mean, Nier Automata is the Game of the Year. Like, come on. Like, there's always this like push and pull, I feel like. I
mean, we're using it. We're saying that dialogue to each other.
Yeah.
I mean, the way I described it online was that it reminds me of people in sports because it makes me feel furious and invigorated.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I listen to all of these podcasts on it lately. I mean, I have a lot of time to be listening to podcasts, and it just makes me mad. Like, when I listen to, like, game men, like, dismiss things or, like, hold up things arbitrarily, whose criteria are always shifting and, who just seem defensive of something iterative or detractive. Like, I don't know. And yet here I am, doing it all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I don't want to go all capitalism, but capitalism does, it compels us to kind of segment things into like hierarchies of quality that don't necessarily exist or can really be perceived laterally. Like you can say that Nier Automata is a better game than Yakuza 0, but you're opening up like a million different variables of like what is better there. Is the writing better in Nier? I mean, probably. Is like the combat better in Nier? Like I would say it's better in Yakuza. Like all this stuff, and like people so arbitrarily and so confidently are just like, yeah, this is better than that, and it is infuriating and tedious. And I also spent 4 hours on a podcast like last week about Game of the Year, and it was really fun. And
which one?
It's called Video Pals. It's this thing I do with my friend Eden at Fontiago on Twitter and some other people, and we just kind of talk about all the games we played this year and how we cared for them. Nier Automata won that because you got to
give yourself a plug. It has to happen.
I got it. I mean, I'm bad at plugging my stuff, so I just plug away in my little corner. But yeah, like all those things. It is frustrating to see people just like get so invested in it, but also it is fun as like a casual thing. I feel like to just like shoot the shit with friends.
Yeah,
I don't know that it matters. Like I've been really upset, and not upset, but like kind of down that like Neo has been kind of left out of the conversation this year. because that was a game that when it came out, people were like, holy shit, this is so weird and wild and like really cool. And as the years gone on, that game has continued to get DLC and support, and like I see nothing about it. I see like no acknowledgement of that. It's like a completely different game now because of like all of the different content they've added and like the ways they've expanded it out. And it was already a huge fucking game. I spent 50 hours playing that game before I realized you could counter, and it's a Souls. So that's a long time without countering. But like that, I feel like is a testament to what a cool weird game that is. But nobody's talking about that because it came out a week before Breath of the Wild. So, like, and that stuff is always kind of exhausting.
I think this touches on like a lot of things that were sort of intriguing me about like the weird concept of Game of the Year because of both its lack of analogy to other mediums, but also its reflection of other mediums in ways that don't actually work with our medium. In that, like, like say like in the Oscars, like the judges were watching a film every single day and using that longevity as the criterion. Say they were like, oh man, I watched The Truman Show every day of 2017. That's why it's my film of the year. Like, but for some reason that means that, that means this game is really good because I kept coming back to it. Anyway, so the first thing I wanted to bring up was that I did a bit of research before the show, and there actually is like a Wikipedia article on like list of Game of the Year awards. And all I discovered was that there's a lot of venues that are doing this, but most of them are very recent. So I was very interested in the old ones. Like the BAFTAs have game awards, and they have since 1997, where they first gave it to GoldenEye 007, which is all right. And then eventually they split it into console, handheld, and PC, and then they just sort of gave up on that after like 3 years. Or like the ZX Spectrum magazine Crash had an annual Readers Award. And so like in 1984, they gave it to Daley Thompson's Decathlon, which I've never heard of.
He's Daley Thompson.
And there's also the former Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, which is a nonprofit organization of industry professionals that have their own awards. They also gave it to GoldenEye in 1997 as their first award.
Everybody was pretty wild about Golden. They had to invent awards just for GoldenEye.
They did. And then, the earliest one I can find is the Arcade Awards from 1979, which gave it to Space Invaders. I don't know. That's cute.
I'm looking here. Empire Magazine, who I do not trust for anything, and I'm finding that I agree the most with them because they gave it to Dark Souls 2, which is a shit game, but it's Dark Souls, so I'll give it to them. And they gave it to Bloodborne, which is the best video game ever made, and then they gave it to Uncharted 4, and then Super Mario Odyssey, and those are all good games. So I agree the most with them, and I think they're the right one.
There's a lot of opinions in this list, and I think it's just sort of. It's strange, though. I kind of forgot that the Game Developers Choice Awards existed, even though I've gone to them ostensibly. I just like, oh yeah, that's a thing.
Yeah,
they gave it to The Sims in 2000. Okay.
They gave it to Overwatch last year.
What else is there? Oh yeah, I think I saw the EGM gave it to Double Dragon in 1988.
Hey, nice. Hey, that's a good game.
Yeah, I just sort of reflecting on it, like. Because what does it mean now, going back and looking at this list, and being like, oh, in 1988, the Game of the Year for one particular magazine was Double Dragon. I'm going to go and play that. But at the same time, like, are we making, like, film lists of, like, people who won the Academy Award specifically, or, like, the Tonys?
I
guess so.
Yeah, arbitrarily we do. I feel like at some level the idea behind these things is like, this is the game that will go on in history, and we will remember 2015 was Bloodborne. And like, yeah. But also because of the nature of like knowledge and like the information economy that we have set up now, that isn't necessary. Like nobody's going to forget Bloodborne if you don't give it an award, right? Because like it is a media property that Sony has an invested interest in continuing to perpetuate over time. And like, even if it didn't, like the video games industry as a whole continues to like regurgitate and recycle these same like 5 properties basically forever. So they feel redundant because at some level they are supposed to be like the idea behind these awards, typically like the Oscars, originally it's always this like, this will go on in history and we will remember this. But in practice, like, games aren't that old, and we talk about them constantly and like incessantly, almost at a frenzied pace. So it really just feels more like they're ads. Like, oh, this year, make sure you buy Super Mario Odyssey because it's the good one. And that's how it often feels to me.
Mm-hmm. I mean, like, even the Oscars are wrong about what's going to be the definitive movie of the year. I mean, a lot of their films of the year I've never heard of, but then sometimes they really nail it. I mean, I guess it's sort of similar with us. I mean, like, when I look at these Game of the Year lists, it's like, oh yeah, these are canonical. Like, I remember the kids at school talking about these, and therefore it's canonical, I guess. I mean, like, but it is also shaping the dialogue of the industry in ways that are like really cramped. I mean, I can't think of whether or not we nominate Marvel Cinematic Universe films these days. Like,
no.
Do we nominate Star Wars? Like,
no.
Or is there their own little category? Like does the Oscars, do they make their own selection within the medium in a way that we don't?
Right. No, they don't. Not to harp on this, but I do just want to point out that Gamist, if you ever look at this list, dear listener, that's a joke for you. Gamist, the Japanese Gamist magazine that was published from 1986 to 1999, they had really good taste, and you should go play all their games, including Vampire Savior. Anyway, so yeah, we don't really segment off things into different, like, you don't see that, like, television show of the, actually, there's a really good example of this that's happening right now, because I think I've mentioned this at least 4 times on this podcast now, but I will continue to because it is 2017. Twin Peaks. There's a big, huge discussion going on in both film and television over what the fuck Twin Peaks is, such that it is making people like upset and like giving them difficulty in coming up with their year-end lists. Because Kairos Cinema said it was the best film of 2017. It is an 18-hour film by that estimation. Variety magazine named it the best television show of 2017, at which point it is 18 episodes of television. And, like, you're seeing this, like, schism develop where people don't know what to call this thing, and they are, like, breaking down. And it is fascinating to watch, because in games, we just, like, whatever, it's an action game. It's fine. Whatever. But, like, you're seeing this, like, complete breakdown, collapse of, like, the notion of film or the notion of television as these two bespoke separate things, which I think is really fascinating and really exciting. But I don't know if that much care or attention is ever really given to, like, what kind of game is this? Or is this, like, I guess there's the eternal, is this a game question? But
mm-hmm. I mean, I find it intriguing why we make these distinctions between film and television when they aren't really relevant and they haven't been the last 10 years. Like, initially it was a budget, it was content, it was whether or not, films were explicit versus a television show not being explicit, it was runtime. But I think that those are all being complicated in ways that collapse those boundaries in ways that should be freeing, I think.
It was also technology. There's, like, for a long time, the big selling point of film over television was that film had a larger aspect ratio, right? You had that period where you saw people, like, CinemaScope was, like, a selling point.
I was going to say VistaVision. I don't know why.
Yeah, that one too. I don't think for very long though. Weren't there like 5 films made with VistaVision?
Yeah, it was a little short-lived, but I don't know. Everyone had their own way of stretching that aspect ratio, and if they wanted to save money, they would usually just film it in 35 mil and then cut it so that the frame would just be like a little bit shorter than usual. Mm-hmm. I don't know. That's just zooming in a little bit. That's not really.
Yeah. Last night, actually, I watched with my girlfriend. I watched Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, specifically because I remembered the like aspect ratio and effects budget of that film being like remarkably like distinct for 1998. It was released in 99, but it was made in 98. And I was wrong. It isn't good, and it isn't very pretty. But yeah, for a long time, like those those barometers of like quality were selling points for other mediums as well in a way that I don't think we think of them as being now. And certainly in music, like for a long time, the whole selling point of a CD was that it sounds better than vinyl, because digital sound is better because it's compact and it's it's not analog. Obviously, that isn't necessarily the case, but we have all these weird little like segmentations of what we consider things being good in what ways they are good. And like I feel like those kind of things are either completely unnecessary or completely discarded when we get into these kind of year-end conversations in a way that I think the fact that they are discarded at this time of year means that they likely are unnecessary, right? Like, because we make a lot of fuss about FOV sliders and graphical fidelity and things like that. But, the game people are talking the most about this year is mostly on the strengths of its writing, which doesn't typically happen. Mm-hmm. Or it's Zelda, which I think actually speaks better to the first priority set, kind of the traditional one.
I'm interested in like the main competitors to the throne of the Game of the Year this year, and like I think the first one that came up, like the earliest, was the Game Awards, and I was made to watch it. I
got really drunk. There was a Bloodborne 2. There was a Bloodborne 2 trailer.
And I think it's such a weird event because I've heard so many things about Jeff Keighley, the host, mm-hmm. in such strange directions. I've heard him called the Dorito Pope. I have heard that he's the last man who loves games. I've heard that he's best buds with Hideo Kojima, and that makes him a good dude. I mean, I
wish I was best buds with Hideo Kojima.
This guy right here, I don't know what he's doing, but I love it. I think is what Norman Reedus said.
That was such a good. It was all worth it. If you haven't seen anything from the Game Awards, please just try to find the clip of the Game Awards where they show the Death Stranding trailer. Because first, the trailer is amazing, and then second, everything surrounding it is amazing because you just have this cult of people who love Hideo Kojima. I'll just sucking his dick on stage. It's amazing.
And then he just says, "Oh yeah."
I love him so much. Fucking nerd.
But whenever I see Jeff Keighley the man, he just sort of looks both like he's gonna punch me in the face, and he also looks very tired.
He looks very sad a lot.
Yeah, he kind of feels like he's about to be like, "Oh yeah, huh? You like that?" And then he's gonna give me a big punch in the head or something. I mean, that's not really. I mean, maybe he just has a bitch face. I have no idea.
Okay. You heard it here, folks. He has a bitch face.
But what I thought was really interesting about the Game Awards was how not the Oscars they were. They were more like the MLA Awards or the Book Awards. It's like this specialized, subsidized, small little ceremony with strange and invisible criteria. And it was where all of the games were made up and even their choices didn't matter because we didn't talk about them at all. They were thrown out. I don't even know what half the awards were. They just sort of gave you to them. They gave them to you 20 times, quickly. Mm-hmm. And then they were and now here's some ads, and now here are some announcements. And I was so intrigued by what other industry is making these huge announcements during an award ceremony?
None.
Why are we so dependent on advertising to make this thing work? I mean, I guess they all are. But I was just so aware of it. It was really weird, but in a way that I was still sort of okay with. I thought it was fun to make fun of. Maybe that's what he was banking on. I don't know.
I mean, I think at some point, for the longest time, for years and years, E3 was sort of the venue where you were here's the new game. And that has sort of diminished in necessity as more conferences and things have come up. And even that has, for the way that release schedules and development cycles work, even that isn't necessarily enough. And so rather than, all of these companies just oh, we're making Bloodborne 2, here you go. like instead of doing that, they like there are all these events like because I don't know if you remember, Game Awards happened, and then like the next day was PlayStation Experience, which I watched and was the worst fucking thing I've ever seen in my life. But Kojima was there too.
Oh yeah.
He had a robot harness on, like the little flapping lights. He had one of the flapping lights from the trailer, like attached to his chest and like up around his back, and he just sat there casually on a couch wearing it for like an hour. It was amazing.
Was it functional?
No, it didn't do anything.
That means we're good. We're still safe. We're still safe.
Yeah, he's just a dork.
It didn't detect anything.
No. There's no hand monsters. But I feel like for a long time those conferences were specifically for that, and that was an okay venue for those things to happen. But as the development cycles have gotten more fragmented, and like things are coming out faster and faster and faster, and we have to get the next product out on the shelf now. I think you're seeing a lot of these like Nintendo does directs all the time, and like the PlayStation Experience, and Xbox I think has a thing in like Q1, Q2 that they do. And
they were in Germany for some reason.
Gamescom, where they do it at Gamescom.
They just sort of announced the same things they announced earlier in the year, but again,
that sucks. But then also you have things like the Game Awards. I think like that, like I think maybe it speaks to, not to get all capitalism again, but I think it speaks to the way that the games industry as a whole is so intrinsically and so necessarily tied into capitalistic demands of, this needs to come out now, and in this cycle, then we have to have a new thing here now. Things are getting so much more. They're just getting churned out at such a rapid pace now that we have to. We have to fit in. Here's a new game. You got to get this one out there. People have to see it. From Software is making a new thing. They've got new Atlas. We've got a new Atlas, and then like it just you got to keep Bayonetta 3. Nobody really bought the first two, but we're gonna do another one because like people like it ostensibly, and like you just keep like making things compulsorily, and like I think that is what the Game Awards is for. I think it is to be another E3. Like, I think that is what... Because, like, what they just... I mean, I don't remember. I watched the whole thing. I drank a bottle of sake. I think they gave a lot mostly to Zelda. I think they gave, like, one thing to Persona. They gave some stuff to Nier, but they didn't nominate it for much.
They played 3 notes of it, I think.
Okay, cool.
What I thought was weird about the Game Awards was it was the same 5 games for every category.
They had a Zelda, they had a Mario, they had a big band play the Mario theme song, but they had the woman on stage, but then she was lip syncing to the vocal track from the song that you can just hear if you boot it up and just leave it on the menu. It was really, really very avant-garde choice. And then they had an orchestra play the Persona soundtrack, but it didn't sound like anything recognizable as music. It was practically avant-garde. Honestly, now that I'm talking myself into it, I think I like Game Awards. Yeah, pretty cool.
Really, really neat choices. I liked when he announced 6 games and then told me to go get some McDonald's.
I liked the one woman who was just like, "Hey guys, here with some eBay deals. We got Halo 5 headset, $300, and don't forget, check our website for more deals and savings here at the Game Awards."
But they were like $20 off of like a headset. It was like the strangest, smallest deals. Like, why would you book that space for something so small?
That's why I game. This is what I'm here for. That's why I game. Yeah, but I don't think I
was upset. I wanted some good deals.
Yeah, the deals really were lacking. I thought that the pomp and circumstance was really there, and I agreed with all the choices. But what I really could have used more of was some of those sweet deals.
I gotta say, I was sitting there and I was considering, like, McDonald's, maybe tonight's the night. Like, we're all gonna die. I mean, Game Awards is on.
Yeah, but these deals just aren't good enough for me to take the plunge. Yeah, it was bad. But I think honestly, I don't think that there isn't, not to be nihilist, not me, but I think that I think there's no point to it. I think there's no reason for it. I think it is just there to sell you whatever that game was about a science fiction woman in an asylum coping with trauma, the deep one. Remember the one with feelings? I think that one.
I'm trying to think of. I don't remember
Like
this.
Setsuma, Asheron's Call, or whatever the fuck it's called.
Isn't that an MMO?
I don't know. What's the video game? I don't remember what it was called. They talked a lot about a game. There was a guy who got drunk on stage and he said, "Fuck the Oscars."
Oh yeah, that was great.
That was a human moment. That felt real.
Avant-garde.
Yeah, I'm not used to that in video games. It's like a mini E3, and that gives me all the depression of E3, but none of the satisfaction.
I know that some gaming venues were watching it to talk over it, which made me feel like it was like, this is like an event so big that, you know, even the industry is watching the industry, and I think that is at the core of what a lot of we were doing. I mean, like, when you're producing a game, like, you're going to look at the calendar, see what's coming out around you, and then try and plan for a time in which you can release your game without being, like, deluged by other things. I mean, most producers are doing that. And so I guess, like, now it's become a thing where we have to watch the Game Awards because the Game Awards is where you announce your game, but the Game Awards is also, for some reason, like, it has taken the place of our major industry awards for whatever reason. Like, there's venues and then there's the Game Awards, and I don't know how it became that.
Yeah, I mean, it's this weird cycle where, like, I mostly watch that to make jokes with my partner, but also I partly watched it because it's like, come on, Jeff Keighley, give me some new Death Stranding, give me some more. Where's the new From game? And I got, you know, honestly, I came out pretty good, but that's not what you watch the Oscars for, right? Like, that's not what you watch.
Why do people watch the Oscars?
I don't know.
Well, shit.
I think to see their favorite. I think to see, like, Ellen DeGeneres. Ellen DeGeneres. I'm sorry. It's been a lot. I'm not quite awake, everybody. I'm sorry. It's I think it's to watch Ellen DeGeneres make some good jokes and gags. I think that's what you watch it for, right? You want to see what James Franco thinks. And I don't know that we don't have very many Ellen DeGeneres in games that aren't, like, press people. Like, we certainly now, I think, to get back to the topic of our first episode, I think we are now definitely getting to a point where, like, if you had Abby from Giant Bomb just talk about some stuff, there would be people who would be like, yeah, cool, Abby's cool, I'd be into that. But in sort of a similar way, but because the Game Awards, there's this, like, there's this entire cottage industry of, like, respectability and of, like, industry expectations that exist there. So Jeff Keighley, Mr. Video Games, is the one who does it, right? He's the one who runs it, and it's, like, his project. And there's, like, this divide where, like, what Jeff Keighley values might not necessarily be what, like, the Giant Bomb folks value, or what, like, Waypoint values. And that, I think that feeds a lot of the disconnect that you and I feel when we see that thing, because we certainly, I think, exist more on the, like, Giant Bomb, Waypoint side of expectations, where I don't really necessarily care about new content for PubGrub, but I do care about, like, what Austin Walker thinks about Legend of Zelda. And, like, you know, I would be more interested in that, which is something you would expect at a real game award ceremony.
I mean, like, to be fair, the Giant Bomb folks cared a lot about that new PubGrub.
I know.
I don't understand it at all. I don't get it.
Everybody I know, like, everybody I know here is super fucking obsessed with PubGrub, and multiplayer
really
don't do it for me. Yeah, I don't care. I just look at it and go, I played DayZ in high school, and that was kind of tedious. But that's me, you know. It was nominated for Game of the Year at the Game Awards, which I think is completely solely because it made a whole lot of money despite not actually being out yet.
But, like, does it define our year? Like, does Pokemon Go define 2016?
Yeah, I'd say Pokemon Go absolutely defines 2016.
Like, is that what the purpose of these awards are? Like, is it supposed to be like, this is what's going to represent this year? Is it about, like, processing the year and packaging it?
I think that's the ostensible hope. I mean, certainly the Oscars sell themselves on that promise. You know, you saw things where, like, I think 12 Years a Slave came out in, like, February or March. But even at that point, everybody was like, I remember that year, everybody was like, okay, it's over. Like, 12 Years a Slave, film of the year. And in fairness, it's a very, very, very beautiful film.
It was really good.
Yeah, it's really good. Stephen Queen's a fucking god. But Also, where are you, Steve McQueen? We need you. Please make a new movie. But yeah, games like, I think you see people doing that. I think certainly Giant Bomb, I know, is talking for like 1,000 hours about what their favorite game of the year is.
It's close. It's about 25, I think.
Okay, that's almost there. But like, and I don't know that anything requires 25 hours of talking, but
25 hours in a small room with like 10 people.
That sounds very sweaty. I think it's very easy to just say Nier Automata, and I think that like certainly you can have conversations that are like, well, I thought this aspect of Super Mario Odyssey was really one of the standout like experiences I had this year. What do you think, Jeremy? And then Jeremy says, oh, I think Legend of Zelda gave me all these different like moments, and like I felt inspired to explore, and I felt like I was in conversation with the developers, and there was an intimacy there that I'd never felt anywhere else. And I think you can go on for forever having these conversations, and they're interesting and illuminating and exciting. And I don't know that there is an answer that comes out of that. I don't know that that is necessary.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I have a bit of a tangent.
Go for it.
So in the past few podcasts I was listening to, I was sort of noting to myself that the few cis women game journalists I know were universally uncomfortable with Nier Automata or didn't get it in ways that me and like the trans women in my life do get or uphold or think that is like the coolest thing ever. And I was wondering like, that's a weird little thing, like a weird little distinction that that's there, but I didn't really know how to like get at it or be like, what's up with that? Whether or not it was like, I think Abby at Giant Bomb was saying like, oh, I think it looks horny and like I hate the way that she dresses, and like all the dudes in the room being like, but it's for a point. Or like Daniel Rando watched all of it and was like, I didn't like it. I watched it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I didn't know what to make of that. That was like distinctly this set of people, or if that meant anything.
I mean, there's different value systems. I think I'm certainly not the person to be asking if a game being too horny is a mark of quality in any capacity, because I have stand for Kojima enough, and I'm unfortunately excited about the new Catherine. So I'm not the person to be asking if like problematic stuff is necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited. I want to know if traps are gay.
I want to see this cis man wrestle with his own internalized transphobia and come out a better person, learning to love a trans woman. I think that sounds beautiful. No, I don't want to get into Catherine talk. There's enough of that. Atlas Discourse. I'm not good. I'm not interested.
Okay.
But I don't know. Like, there's just different. I mean, people come from different experiences and perspectives, and I think certainly, like, the application and proper use of horny, I think, is something that you see a lot of people. I think we're, as kind of a games culture, at least in our little queer corner, starting to define parameters of what we think is interesting horny or not. And I think that there are certainly disagreements on that. I personally think Nier Automata is a very interesting horny. But
is it even a horny game?
Not necessarily, but the robots are horny looking. And they are for a purpose that's like in service of kind of these questions of humanity and of like sexual, like, can they feel, much less can they like love, can they love physically? Like, there's all these questions that go into it. And I think that those are interesting, and I think it is pointful. I think also that 2B has a really nice ass, and I think that is the representation I need in the world. But obviously that is, a value set that I have that I don't expect everyone to have. Typically I ask or hope that those disagreements don't, like, once somebody's going, oh, Nier has butt in it, I don't like it. Like, that's usually the point where I'm just kind of, all right, if that's where you draw the line, then, like, okay, you have fun. That's not really, that just seems so, you're just shutting a door off to, like, this, like, rich narrative that, like, okay, it's got a butt in it, so, like, that's bad. And typically I find that sort of exhausting, and I try to minimize that kind of engagement with things, but that's me. And I'm different from, any number of people, so.
Yeah. I was looking over the various venues that were taking over their own little Game of the Year awards, and like there's some interesting things happening. I mean, Polygon's very straightforward. You know, it's the 50 best games that all of our staff got together and just talked about. I mean, they usually have like, I've never listened to it, but I think they have like the besties every other month or something, or maybe once a year. I see it on YouTube, and then I'm like, oh, okay. Like, I guess I just don't really think about what the McElroys think about games. Like, I don't really look to them for that. Waypoint's doing a pantheon of games after last year, where I think they were doing a video game high school.
Hmm.
And so, like, all of their themes are like, you know, they're making a mythology of video game protagonists, or like, you know, of concepts from games. And then for their podcasts, they're not showing you the deliberation, but they're looking through their own personal top tens, and they're sort of picking out things that were interesting. Like they discuss what didn't make their list and how it placed on other people's lists, or they talk about like a game from their list that was on nobody else's, which is the one that was on today, I think. So it's a nice little twist on it. But the overarching thing that it really points to is how we originated with a magazine format that sort of transformed into the same personality-driven venue that is now giving us their deliberations as an entertainment. That, like, people look forward to it all year. They say, oh man, I can't wait for Game of the Year when they're gonna, like, talk crap out of this game. I wonder how this game is gonna do when Game of the Year comes. Because, like, that's when you're home from work or whatever, and like, there's 30 hours of game men yelling at each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I personally find it more interesting to play games. Not to be a bitch, but like there comes a point where, like, you know, I mentioned this on the last podcast, and I'm still doing it. I finished Yakuza 0, and I've just been completing all of the little side quests because that's where the story lives. Like, that's where the characterization lives, and I've just been doing all the little mini games because, like, I really want to learn how to play mahjong, and it can double as a mahjong instructor. And like, maybe I really want to learn how to play CeeLo and like get really good at that, and like it can do that for you. And it has all these different games, and like I've just been kind of digging in and doing that, and I've been not really so much worrying about, like, I'm pretty sure Yakuza 0 is not going to make it on anybody's Game of the Year list, and that's fine. And as for, like, you know, I've been talking up Nier, a game that I think is, I mean, if I were to have a Game of the Year, it's probably that. I've played about an hour and a half of Nier, because I don't like Platinum. I don't like the way that they do action very much. I find it really tedious. I know a lot of people really love it, and that's super cool. It's just not my thing. So I intend to play Nier very soon, but like, just my understanding of where that story goes and that narrative, like, how deep and rich it is, just from things I've talked to people about and like things I've seen kind of secondhand. I just, like, it's one of those rare instances where I can just look at a thing and go, okay, I love that. Like, I love whatever that's doing so intensely that, like, I'm down for wherever it wants to go. Sort of like Death Stranding. And I'm comfortable enough with just, like, yeah, I'll get to that when I have time. When I have, like, a month to just set aside and just, like, dig deep into Nier Automata, I'm going to do it, and it's going to be really lovely. But until then, like, I don't feel this, like, pressing urge to, like, and I did for a few months. I was, like, very, like, oh my god, I have to play Nier before the end of the year because I have to have a Game of the Year. And then over time, I just sort of settled into this, like, you know what? I'm playing Yakuza right now. I've waited for years and years and years to get into Yakuza, and I'm finally doing it, and it's finally happening organically, and I'm just going to let it happen. And I don't really care. Anyway, Oikospiel is actually the Game of the Year that I played, but I've plugged that game enough on here. Yeah, I don't. It's a complicated push and pull that we feel, I think, as game players. Which I think is distinct from, like, how the press feel, but we do certainly we carry some of those expectations, and, like, I think I've certainly seen a lot of people, like friends and close, you know, loved ones, just like have these conversations, and I'm just kind of like, it's interesting to just kind of sit off to the side and just be like, you're just kind of parroting the same kind of, like, value systems that like GameSpot or IGN or all these different outlets kind of put forth. I don't think it's necessarily bad, but it is interesting.
I'm also wondering like how other developers feel, I guess. I mean, I sort of assumed that our games are out of the running, and then when it got name dropped on Giant Bomb, I was like freaking out.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it was just like a side mention and it got cut immediately, it still felt like, oh, this is a big deal. But like, you know, if you're in a studio, like if you're a member of a 300-person team, like is there like this joint desire to be recognized in that regard? I'm not sure.
At some point, I'm sure, just knowing how gross the game industry can be sometimes, I'm sure that there's a lot of hiring and firing that lives and dies by that stuff. But I don't know that. You know, I've never worked at a big studio. I've certainly felt the absence of Mass Effect Andromeda in a way that I didn't really care about that game when it came out, and because I just BioWare's not my thing. But it's certainly one of those things that when it comes out, you sort of expect, like, oh yeah, BioWare did love it, gotta have it. You know, I think Dragon Age Inquisition was a game that people were like, kind of, yeah, it's good writing. But then when Game of the Year came along, people were really, really into like, kind of advocating for it, and it's just not here with Andromeda, and like that absence is really palpable. Even to me, somebody who just doesn't really care.
It's been getting the Razzies.
That's kind of rude. Haven't they suffered enough?
I don't know. It's everyone's favorite punching bag, I think, because they were so invested in the series specifically. I'm not sure what makes specific IPs more cherished or more sacred, but that's the way it is. So, yeah, I think the next thing I have that I wrote down for myself was the invisible criteria, which I'm trying to remember what I was talking about. I think it was like noting that critics and game players, or I don't want to say gamers, God, you know, they justify their picks, or they organize their lists in ways that sort of come up out of nowhere, and arbitrary distinctions that then get dropped for other categories, and that really it just sort of comes down to gut feeling, and I couldn't really pinpoint any system on it, like how people organize experiences.
Yeah, I feel like there's certainly, I think a lot of this pulls up that kind of play versus narrative discussion that I find outright tedious. Like it's a well-written game, but the game's like, it sucks. And I know I did just say that with Nier. So like, this is the thing, like that exactly illuminates, like I just said with Nier, like I'm so here for the writing and for the characterization and all of that, but I don't really like Platinum. So, but I still think it's the best game this year, probably. But I find that as those things as kind of guiding metrics of like, oh, this game had really good writing. Like, I don't know, Danganronpa was probably the best written game of the year, but I thought, like, as an RPG goes, like, Persona 5 really was the best, but the writing is terrible in Persona 5. But I really think that Xenoblade has, like, and, like, I think that I don't know what is gained from that kind of, oh, you know, like, Zelda's the best open world game of this year, obviously. But I don't know where that gets us to just keep segmenting things off like that. I similarly don't really know where it gets us to just go like, well, they're all games and they all exist on the same spectrum of quality, and this one's the best. It all just feels kind of ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. I thought there was like two different like axes where it was like either they qualify something because it's notorious, or they qualify it because they believe that it has artistic merit, and that these two things sort of compete with each other in a back and forth. Like there is no hard and fast, you know, artistic merit conquers notoriety. It's usually like, hey, was this thing very popular? Was this thing emblematic of the year? Or was this thing good for art? And like, I think Nier's winning so far because of its contributions to the medium.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, like, you know, PubGrub or PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds is just because it sort of came out of nowhere and it's becoming the new thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, you know, like, are we gonna remember fidget spinners? Like, is this game gonna last? Like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't. In PubGrab, like it's always like it doesn't have the marketing and money arm that Overwatch does. So it's hard to know if PubGrab becomes this thing in the way that Overwatch will continue. There's no question of that. But yeah, it's hard to know, and it's harder still when like not to call this entire enterprise into question here that we are doing, but it is hard when like to know how do I phrase this? It's when we, the players and like developers and consumers, begin to just regurgitate those same exact value attitudes. At what point are we having a productive conversation? At what point are we just perpetuating this kind of empty, vapid consumption cycle? Right? Like how when are we no longer stepping outside and looking back in, and when are we just living inside of it wholly? I think certainly calling into question something like PubGrab as like this huge totemic thing is valuable, but then also I do see like the amount of like value and like experience and profound experience that I've seen people get out of PubGrab as a system, as like an architecture of experience. I think that is really valuable, and I can certainly see why somebody would think that is like, oh, this is where I've had the most valuable multiplayer experiences with people this year. That doesn't seem like a controversial statement to me. But then also I do internally, there's part of me that's like, well, I think that's great, but I think that certainly the formalistic experimentation that we saw from like Oikaspiel and Nier and kind of our own games, I think is far more interesting and far more compelling. And I think that is, it's sort of I think Twin Peaks is a film, actually, and it's the best film of this year. It's that argument. Like, I think that even though this thing might be a different kind of experience, that I think that kind of experience is a little bit more valuable, and I certainly live on that side. But I wonder then, is that, like, who cares? Who cares what I think? And is anything gained from me just going out there and being like, hey, if you haven't played everything yet, that really was one of the most profound things I experienced this year. Even if everything, like, I can explain to you in one sentence what everything is, and you will know exactly if you like it or hate it. And yeah, I wonder at what point we are contributing value and at what point we are just sort of jerking off.
Yeah, I'm worried about Game of the Year as a tool that we use to process as a culture, because it feels like it's contributing to our industry understanding the medium as a linear progression of reactions. That like every year we add onto a base formula or we react to a base formula, and this grows the medium, and that like every year there's one. That like if we go back through the timeline, we're gonna find the original thing, Space Invaders, and then we just built on that and built on that and built on that, because every year we package up the things that came out in this big pool of like cultural reverberations, and we say that's the one that was emblematic.
Yeah, I don't know.
Because like in my experience, like art isn't like that. Like in my experience, like there's so many things kind of acting on each other. Like I've seen it in my own circles, like the way that I release my games or price my games or make my games, or like the way that I dare to market my games makes a reaction that other people will price similarly, or they will price differently, or they will try things apart from what I tried, or they will use my game's performance as evidence for their own next project. Like we're all sort of reacting to each other's works in ways that are way more intricate and subtle. Mm-hmm. Like one person's sad robot game is going to beget a million others, and I can't really think of like there being one game of a year because we set a milestone. We set like this distinct little goalpost for 2017, and everything that came out in here is now sectioned off. Like I see it as a lot more fluid.
Mm-hmm. I certainly do too, and I think that is the more valuable way to look at things. I it feels reductive to just be like, well, yeah, but you can't sell that. But I think to some level it is just you can't. God knows I wish you could just go, hey, like you should play I don't know, LSD Dream Emulator, because it begets the entire notion of a walking simulator, and it's very interesting to like go back and view that and then like experience this trajectory of things. And I wish so deeply that you could sell people on like not tied to IP, not tied to any kind of marketable thing, just like here you can watch the progression of a mechanic set and of an ideology of like play. You can watch that develop over time. If you play these games, if you play this like spectrum of games. I wish so much that you could sell that. If anybody knows how you can, please start doing it, because that's so much more interesting to me than here's all the games you can play that have Hideo Kojima's name on them. But you can't, and like we've wound up in this situation where like 1998 is The Legend of Zelda and fucking Half-Life, and God forbid anything else came out that year. I'm sure there's some other games that people think were amazing in 1998. Panzer Dragoon Saga. But that's how we divide 1998. We think of 1998 as like the best year for gaming because it had all these games. 2004, it had Half-Life 2. It had one of the GTAs, I think. And like, whoa, 2004. And it's just Wind Waker, I think. But yeah, it's just like, that's how we sell. That's how we like self-mythologize. Like the industry, it's like, wow, we had this, look at how things developed and how you can, re-experience them like in context, and we'll give you this context, but it's just other things to buy. And it feels so hollow at a point. Mm-hmm. It doesn't feel like you're perpetuating an arts culture so much as you are just like, here, you play Deus Ex because like you can go buy it on GOG. It's like $2 right now. You should really play Deus Ex. And it's just like, okay.
Yeah, I find myself trying to salvage things from that wreckage. Like, I try and find curators who can go back to 1998 and say, here are the things that you're not going to hear about, because I think that there's a lot more interesting things in what was left behind.
I certainly agree.
Like, who didn't react to this specific thing, and why was it not really useful for the medium in within a capitalistic mindset, like as a product, as a thing to sell? What about these games weren't useful things to take from?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know. I worry about the Game of the Year as a system because I feel like we are currently in the process of like redefining sets of interactions, that we are currently crossing different like apparatuses to play games or interactive media upon. And like, we're about to evolve beyond defining interactions as a genre. Like, I think we're about to hit somewhere that isn't just a linear progression from like arcade machines. I think that there's so much about to happen, and we're holding ourselves back by doing this little packaging thing every year, because who gets in and who doesn't get in? And like, who decides who's the people who decide, I guess. Does that make any sense? Like Abby Russell is my age, and she graduated from college this year, and now she's a game journalist, and her opinion is what's defining what Giant Bomb says. Like, I don't really know what makes any of this work besides the fact that it just does.
Yeah, I mean, at some point it's an industry apparatus, right? Like, I mean, it works because it reacts to a thing that is rigid and has a set degree of predictability that you can kind of schedule around, and you can kind of it's I don't know. It does feel sort of like it is on the verge of collapse, though, as things become more and more segmented, and like sort of what we consider video games become sort of like not irrelevant, not less relevant, but there is certainly there's an entire other definition of game that is now beginning to at least make as much, if not, increasingly more money than what we consider games. And like, we are seeing now our definition of games begin to buckle to that. Star Wars Battlefront 2, I think, is an example of that, going very poorly. And this it doesn't seem like whatever lies on the other side of that schism, it doesn't seem like our apparatus is necessarily really prepared for. And I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing, but it is definitely something that is going to have to be reckoned with.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to contradict our entire enterprise, and I want to ask you what your game of the year is and why.
I mean, I've said Nier a couple times. I would say Oikospiel, probably, of the games I've actually played. Like, it operates on different axes, right? Like, if multiplayer games are your question, then Splatoon 2, absolutely. That game has brought me a lot of joy and a lot of satisfaction. If it's just simple play, Mario Odyssey is pretty high up there. I've played a lot of really good games this year. I usually don't play very many video games, but, I played Yakuza 0 a lot. I played Super Mario Odyssey. I played a little bit of Zelda, but I didn't really like it. I really loved Odyssey. I really loved Oikospiel a lot. I would say that is probably actually my, like, if there's one game in 2017 that I would say you absolutely should play this to anybody and everybody listening, I would say Oikospiel. It's free, so you can just go do that. I would, but like, Nier Automata is a game I haven't very much played, and if you ask me, like, of 2017, what's the thing that I would say in 5 years, like, God, this was a moment, I would say Nier Automata. I think that is absolutely, in the same way that if you asked me what in 1998, I would say Metal Gear Solid. Like, it's exactly the same, like, this is a moment where we begin to build a new language of understanding exactly how game narrative can express itself, and what kind of labyrinthine, like, ways it can be felt by a player and, like, can be unpacked from all these different angles through play. I would say that Nier Automata is absolutely the beginning of a new language of narrative expression in games, in a way that no other game has been this year or in recent memory.
Mm-hmm.
What about you?
I think you know what I'm going to say.
You say Nier?
Really? I haven't played Nier.
I know. Well, neither have I, really. Was Mass Effect?
It is Mass Effect Andromeda, but not for the reasons you're thinking. I think that Mass Effect Andromeda is the most emblematic game of 2017 because it is the mismanaged product of capitalistic collapse, whose desires and ambitions were to develop a story about irrational escape to a whole other galaxy for no reason beyond needing to not be where they were, and whose protagonist is a half-human, half-android hybrid being that everyone is scared of and doesn't know how to understand. I think everything about its production has a lot to do with the state of the industry today, and I think that the things that it concerns itself with have to do with the anxieties we're about to see in the next 3 years.
I'd say that seems fair from what I know about Mass Effect Andromeda. I would actually like to redact my point. I would say that the best game of the year is Twin Peaks, because Twin Peaks is anime, Twin Peaks is a video game, Twin Peaks is it's everything. It's an experience.
Twin Peaks is life.
Twin Peaks is a book. It's actually multiple books. It's a movie. It's an interactive installation. It's everything. Twin Peaks. Go check it out.
I think that wraps it up. Do you want to take us out of here?
Sure. If you like whatever this was, and you would like to support it, you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/metagame.fun, METAGAMEDOTFUN. There you can get access to, at certain donation tiers, you can get access to a Discord where you can talk with other listeners and all kinds of cool stuff. It also keeps us on the air and pays for hosting. You can find us on Twitter at OHPOORPUP, OHPOORPUP.
Mm-hmm. I have a Twitter account at Sophia Park with an underscore, though these days I'm mostly on Mastodon, cybre.space/@Sophia, if that makes any sense. I don't know. You don't have to, but it's there.
And you can also find the podcast, you probably know this, but you can find it at metagame.fun, all spelled out, on Twitter.
And also metagame.fun, the URL. That one's not actually spelled out like words, though.
Yeah, that one's a whole website.
Why did we actually name it that, then? God. it was now we have to clarify every single time.
Yeah. It's fun. It's deliberate.
How long has this been? Let me check. We've been on the air for an hour. Neat.
An hour.
Whew, I'm exhausted.
Yeah, me too.
How do people do this for 25 hours?
Oh, God. I think they get paid a lot of money.
I think they get paid very little money.
Who knows?
I guess we'll see you next time.